Happy Monday, gents. It's good to see everybody. Welcome to the Connect Man podcast, Jordan.
It is so great to be back here. I'm excited to have a conversation with both of you.
And
Absolutely.
I learned something new today, which was really inspiring, and it also puts some pressure on us, and by default puts pressure on you. But uh, I found out from Jordan's mouth that the reason he writes books is to be on the Kinetic Man podcast, so
That's
that
right.
we can really talk about these books and emphasize just how awesome the content is. So Jordan, you keep writing books, and we'll keep having you on, bud.
Yeah, I gotta keep saying important stuff. Otherwise, what reason would you guys have to have me on? So this is really
Exactly.
important.
And this is
Uh,
like the pinnacle. It's like, and I'll acknowledge, it's Rogan, and then right after Rogan,
Connect
the
man,
Kinetic
right
Man
there.
It's
is
right
like
there.
right there. We just have been reticent to, sign the big contracts. We don't want to be tied to, specific platforms. So but that's, I'm glad that you recognize that, Jordan.
Yeah, man, good conversations are important. And I think
They
it's
are.
what makes the world run. So we need to have as many forums as possible where we're having good, important, deep conversations. And all joking aside, it's a pleasure to be here because I think that's what you guys strive for.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Hey, I had an experience last night. I'm just curious if either of you have had a similar experience. I got tickets to to a Christian concert, to a concert to take my kids to. My kids are 9 and 6. My daughter's been to one concert. My son has been to zero concerts. He's 6, and this was like I thought this would be a really cool first concert to take him to, and kind of fill him with the spirit. And two guys that we listen to all the time, Brandon Lake and Phil Wickham, and so I was like just fired up, right, all day long, really anticipating and excited about it. Tried to like keep my kids kind of at bay and not like get all worn out. So I knew my son would probably be pretty tired because it was gonna be a late night. We get there, it's going well, they're loving it, and like about maybe an hour into it, about half, maybe like a quarter of the way into like the main show, my son literally is sitting in my wife's lap and he falls asleep. Falls asleep. Like it's loud, like it's noisy, loud. My son passes out, falls asleep, and I just look over and I'm like, what the heck, man? Like I'm like super disappointed and like almost kind of like angry, that I was like looking so forward to this thing and how like it would be such an impact. And he falls asleep and we have to leave early and go home. And like I was like totally like bummed the rest of the night. Have you guys ever had that experience?
That's a very specific question.
But
Like,
like
have you ever, I'm totally
just like
joking.
looking
It,
forward to something and then like totally it doesn't go the way you hope it would.
it's a great metaphor for parenthood, actually, right?
Mm.
This idea that we come into parenthood with all these expectations and we have these beliefs of these things that are going to be important to our kids. But ultimately, as a parent, we all learn this. Your kids end up setting the tone. So it doesn't matter what expectation you came in with. What becomes important to them has to do with them. And we can only give them so much of that, right? Because we love sports. So we want to put them in a sport, or we love this band. So we want to get them into music, but they kind of choose what they want themselves.
Yeah, I love that, and I'll tell you, I'm excited about this conversation. You have a book coming out in when depending when we air this, but in January, it'll be before January. So if you change the date, you got to let us know. Most
David, are you
notes.
saying that the book will come out when this airs? Like, so if we air
This
early, like
this
Jordan's
book
gonna
will come
change it
out
coming out?
in 2 weeks. But you sent us. I want to say one thing. You sent us an advanced copy. I'll tell you, it is very, very difficult to read a PDF on a cell phone. But dude, I'll tell you what happened to me last night. I should have gone to bed, but I was sitting in my chair downstairs, and I couldn't put your book down. And then I looked at the clock. It was midnight, and I'm like, dude, I got to get up in 5 hours. Like this is bad. This is bad. I need to just put this book down. And so one, thank you so much for this book. I can't wait till it's available for everybody. And I will tell you this, it's about purpose, right? It's called the Purpose Code. It's about purpose, and you talk about big P, little P. And there's two things that have happened, and I want to dive into the book. But one thing, we had a guest and he said something along the lines of no, I was listening to somebody talk through legacy, and it really challenged me because he was like, "Hey man, I want a living legacy. I don't care what happens after I die. I want a living legacy. I want a legacy now. I want to be an impact now." And that really hit me. And I'm like, "Man, that's fascinating." And then on top of that, I was reading your book, and just the idea of purpose, big P, little P, and how so many things are twisted. And where I think it's relevant to Stu's comment too is I think big P is this false expectation, and really in order to make a difference in the world, I have to have this huge platform and I have to be talking to millions of people and it has to be big, 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 goal oriented, all this stuff, right? And then you talk about little P and you talk about the I think Roman, or I can't remember the name in
Roman. Yep.
the yeah, Roman and Celia and these different people, and how the little P in the day-to-day interactions is actually where the magic's at, right? And it changes the whole dynamic. So I want to turn it over to you because it's not only just big P, little P, big crowd, little crowd. It's not that. It's vastly different. Even the way that you frame goal oriented versus not goal oriented, and everything you break down, dude. It was such a fascinating read, but it really spoke to me, dude. Like it really challenged me in a way that I'm like, man, every day, how am I showing up? Every day, how am I showing up? And in that showing up, in those actions, I'm fulfilling purpose. And you said one thing too, you talked about it, and I have a question for later, but you talked about I also have the power to create that purpose, right? So a lot there, but I just want to one, thank you for the beautiful book, first off, and but just the thought and the power that went into this idea and how much it's impacted my life already.
So let me give you some background too. So people listening, this idea of the reason I wrote this book is because I had written my first book, Taking Stock, and I had spent a lot of time talking about purpose, identity, and connections and how it relates to our financial future. And as I was marketing that book, people kept on coming back to me and saying, "Hey, you keep on saying you need to find your purpose, but I'm stressed out. I'm anxious. I've been searching for my purpose forever. I can't find it. I don't think there is such thing as purpose." And so this sent me off on researching really this idea of behind purpose because I know purpose is important and yet people are struggling with it and it's causing anxiety. And the studies bared that out. It showed that purpose is associated with longevity, health, and happiness. So all these really good things, tons of research on this. But purpose is also associated in 91% of people with something called purpose anxiety, this idea that finding their purpose makes them stressed or depressed or feel lost. And so it was really a paradox. And that's why I wrote this book. How can it be both the most important thing and also seriously anxiety provoking? And so what I realize is that purpose is probably two things, not one. And one of those things is really positive and beneficial and leads to that happiness, health, and longevity. And the other one probably leads to disappointment and anxiety. As you were talking about it, I'm called these big P purpose and little P purpose. That kind of bad purpose is that big P purpose. It's really goal oriented, it's audacious, it's win or lose. There's a high probability of failing. And a lot of people never get towards that big goal and feel let down. Whereas little P purpose is all about process. It's not about whether you reach a goal or not. It's doing things that light you up, that fulfill you, that you're happy at the end of the day, whether you reached a goal or not. And I've just found that people's connection, their sense of flow and being in their lives, and eventually even creating a legacy probably have a lot more to do with little P purpose than big P purpose. And I think that's the crux of the book and what most people may not realize immediately. Because a lot of us, when we talk about purpose, is like, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to become president. I'm going to travel to the moon. I'm going to be a major league baseball player, all this big stuff. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of us don't actually have agency to do those things.
Yeah. And Stu, before what I know is going to be an awesome question, I also want to thank you because you gave language. I'm not a big goal guy. Like I just never been, and I've always felt, especially what Stu and I do, I've always felt very uncomfortable with the idea of like I'm not the guy that writes the goals and has the checklist, and like I just never have been. I don't even write goals down really. I have things I aspire towards, and I work hard towards things. But I love you gave me language you gave me permission through your language to be like I'm totally cool. Like I'm good with like it was just fascinating that it really took a weight, probably years and years of weight off my shoulders to be like, I don't need to be to live in my purpose. I don't need that stuff, the big audacious Harry, all that stuff. It just because it's never resonated with me. So thank you for that as well, unintentionally. But I imagine there's a
I,
lot of people out there like that.
and I always tell people we should be goal agnostic, but not goal phobic. There's nothing wrong with goals, but if your sense of purpose is 100% linked to reaching that goal, a lot of times, especially the bigger and the more audacious that goal is, the more likely you're going to be disappointed. And think about this. Let's say you have this huge goal of becoming president and you spend your whole young adult life trying to get there. If you don't enjoy the process, if you're not doing what lights you up inside and what interests you, all in the service of getting to this goal, and you spend 20, 30 years getting to this goal, doing stuff you don't like, even if you make it to president and you get that for 4 years or 8 years and then it's gone, you've spent 30 years in service of 8 years and then it's over. Like, who wants to be unhappy those 30 years getting to this goal? And a lot of times the goals are even smaller. Like, a lot of times the things we wish for, we feel happy with reaching that goal for a few minutes or a few days or a few hours, and then it's gone. But we might have spent lifetimes getting there. So the point is, if you're not enjoying that process, if you're not enjoying those lifetimes getting to that big, audacious goal, then it's probably not worth it.
Hey, Jordan, I'm curious. There's a lot of buzzwords out there, some from authors, like Simon Sinek is his why, right? His meaning and purpose. And if you're a believer, like God created you for a certain, reason, a thing, right? Like, is that all kind of one thing? Like, how do you equate, Simon Sinek's why to purpose, to meaning, to God's creation? Like, how does that all fit together? Do you see them differently?
So let's first talk about meaning and purpose, right? So they're actually two very, very difficult things. Meaning is cognitive based, it's our way of thinking about our past. It has everything to do with our thoughts and it has everything to do with things that have already occurred in our life. This is basically the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Happy people tend to tell themselves hero stories like things were bad. I had to deal with all sorts of crappy stuff, but I overcame it and it made me a better person today. Whereas unhappy people tend to tell themselves victim stories. All this bad stuff happened to me. I could never be the person I wanted to be. And that's why I am where I am today. That's meaning. And it's all about the past. Purpose is all about the present and future. And it's not about thoughts, it's actually about actions. So, purpose is or are those actions that we're going to do in the present and future to be our best selves. You need both meaning and purpose to form happiness. You need both sides. You need both the cognitive understanding of your past, where you see yourself as a hero, as well as the present and future, where you're doing purposeful things, where you're entering that flow state of doing stuff you love doing. Your why is what drives you in purpose. So, purpose is pretty much why you do what you do. And so the why is the driver. And I often tell people you don't find your why, you create your why. But there are some anchors to purpose, right? They're purpose anchors. They're things that naturally light us up and interest us. But then we have to create that sense of purpose around it. So our why is what lights us up and what are we interested in? So I think they're very different things, but they're all connected.
Yeah, I love that, Jordan. It reminds me, in the intro to your book, you say purpose doesn't need to be something glamorous or difficult to find. In fact, it doesn't need to be something you find at all, but instead something you create. And to the point you're just saying, so I love this because first, as we already touched, it doesn't have to be huge. Like it doesn't have to be big piece stuff, right? It doesn't have to be that. But second, it can be created. And I feel like there's too many people out there, myself included, who waste so much time in the pondering of purpose versus living it. Which, to your point, right? You just said like it's something you do. It's things you do. And I've literally, and I'm assuming I'm not alone here, but I've literally been on my knees crying out to God, and not even in the distant past. Like, what did you create me to be, and what did you create me to do? Like, what is it that you want from me, God? And then I wait, right? I'm like, what do you want me to do, God? And then you just wait. And it's not supposed to be that way. And I'll tell you, I've become a much happier person in defaulting to action in this area. But I'm just curious, we talk about these things, but what's practical advice to get, whether it's to get out of your head or get off your knees or whatever it is that you need to do? What is the practical meat to what you're talking about?
So it's the difference between abundance and scarcity. The old way of thinking of is there's this one main purpose that I'm supposed to fulfill, that I've been ordained by God to do, or whatever you believe in. And if I don't find it, everything is lost. That's a very scarcity mindset oriented belief system. I think it's the other way around. It's abundance. You can find purpose in anything. You just have to have an inkling or a joy in doing that thing, and then you create a life of purpose around it. And so, what we're really looking for is something that's everywhere. It's a simple question. What could be something that could bring you joy? What we're looking for are what I call purpose anchors, these things we want to then build a life of purpose around. And when you take the stress off of it and realize that there could be a million purpose anchors in my life, the tough part is not finding the anchors, it's building purpose around them. So I'll give you some examples of things that seem little that are purpose anchors in my life and things that are very big. So for me, I love reading. Reading has become a purpose anchor in my life. And I'm not talking about self-improvement. I love reading sci-fi and mysteries and like I love all these cop novels and all those kind of stuff. And I will sit and read every day, a year or two, just for pleasure. And that has become purpose in my life. And that's a simple purpose anchor. But you know what? I also like to educate, teach, and communicate, and I love podcasting. So, podcasting has also become a purpose anchor in my life, and I can build a world of purpose around it. Now, let me tell you why both are important. Reading sounds kind of boring and bland, and sounds like it's something I do just for me and wouldn't touch anyone else in the world. But if I really love reading and I've really made it into a purpose anchor, I'm not only going to read books, that's the work involved, the creating a world of purpose around it. I might join book clubs. And hey, I'm kind of a good writer, so maybe I will be a test reader for people who want to write these kind of books because I read so many of them and I'm a writer myself. And maybe in doing this, I'll create a community. I will be like the flame that entrenches the moth to me because we both have these interests. And when people see me lit up and doing things I love to do, I'm going to affect other people. Maybe I'm going to give someone confidence to write that first sci-fi book when they never had it. And maybe they're going to change the world. And that book is going to fulfill a need for someone that really helps them. We don't know, but by engaging in purpose, I'm doing something deeply important to myself and I'm building this life around myself, but I'm also touching other people. It's hard to see that when you just think of, I'm going to do something I like, which is reading books. It's much easier to say, I'm going to podcast, and that's going to change the world, right? Because I'm going to have these deep conversations and I'm going to talk about lovely things that I like think are important to everyone else. And hopefully that will touch the people who listen to me and they'll change their lives because of that. But in both situations, I love the process of reading books and I love the process of podcasting so much that even at the end of the day, after my hour of recording an interview with someone, if no one else listens to that episode, I still feel like I did something important with my time. And so for me, that was deeply purposeful, little p purpose. It was goal agnostic. I don't care what goal comes of it. I don't care how many people listen to it. Hey, I'd love it to change the world, but if it doesn't, no big deal because that hour spent interviewing that person making my podcast was enough. And so there's really nothing to lose there. It's these inklings. So how do we get back to these purpose anchors, these inklings, so that we can then do the hard work, which is building purpose around them? And as I mentioned in the book, there's 4 or 5 really good exercises you can do to start figuring out what your purpose anchors are. You and I, we all talked about my last book, Taking Stock, where I talk about the life review process. Life review, this structured series of questions we do with hospice patients about their lives, where we ask them about their biggest successes, biggest failures, most important people in their life, their biggest regrets and wishes. The life review is a perfect example of something you can do, a young, healthy person now, and it can really help you look at regrets in your life. And guess what the word regret means in someone who has a long life ahead? It means purpose, right? So that's a great way, a life review. The other thing is you can use the art of subtraction, also from my last book. Let's say you don't love your job, but is there a piece of it you really do love? Something that you come in the morning and you're like, this is going to be a good day because I'm doing this activity today. Using the art of subtraction at work, maybe you can find something you really love and make a purpose anchor out of that. I think childhood is another great place to look at. What did you love doing as a child? I loved collecting baseball cards. I'm so busy, I don't even have time to go back to that. But if I'm looking for more purpose anchors, I would love to go back and become a collector again. And I love seeing old pictures of baseball players. I mean, that just lights me up. And so that could be another purpose anchor. And hey, if you run out of everything else, you use the spaghetti method. You throw a bunch of things against the wall and see what sticks. Say yes to stuff you don't normally say yes to. Get involved with groups or types of people you don't normally get involved with. Try new things. and see if any of it lights you up. There are tons of ways to find these purpose anchors. Again, we're getting to abundance, not scarcity. You can't lose at this. You can't lose.
Jordan, I hear all this, and as I'm my checklist, type A mentality type person, there's this expectation of a timeline, right? Like, hmm, I'm gonna do all this stuff, and I have the expectation that I'm gonna find my purpose by X date, right?
You
And
turn it into a goal. You turn it purpose into a
I
Yeah.
goal.
turned it into a
And
goal, right?
You use the F word, find. Whereas I think mostly you really
Mm.
create it. It's
There you
mostly
go.
you come up with some of these ideas of what's important to you, but then the timeline is really up to you. I love race cars. I loved race cars as a kid. I used to always watch race cars. Now the timeline is in your court. Am I going to take some classes in how to be a race car driver? Am I going to write a race car blog? Am I going to start a race car podcast? Am I going to go join the local Porsche Racing Society and meet up with people and we can look at our cars and blah, blah, blah? Am I going to go see if I can volunteer in a pit crew for some racing team? Am I going to go karting? Like 3 million possibilities. All you got to do is start. All you got to do is wake up every morning and say, this is something that's important to me. What would light me up today? What would get me excited? What could I do that would feel like I'm creating purpose? You can keep on having that goal mindset. Like, I have to get there. I have to get there. I have to get there. But again, the problem with that is the joy never ends up being in the goals. And a lot of times, once you get the goals, you're already looking towards that next goal, right? There's these hits of dopamine. We all know this. Like, when we buy things and it makes us happy for a second, and then we're like, why did I waste my money? It's that dopamine you get from buying something. It's the same with drug users, right? Someone strung out on drugs, when they take that one hit, they get that huge dopamine, that feeling good, and then it wears out and they feel bad. The same thing goes for goals. Like, goals feel really good in the short term, but then we get withdrawal. You get addicted to goals and achievement and all of that stuff. We really don't want as much dopamine. I think in the end, we want something called oxytocin. It's another neurohormone, and it has a lot more to do with things like flow state. It has to do with a lot more to things like joy and happiness. And this is when we're deeply engaged in things that are important to us. And have you ever noticed, like, if you've ever been in a true flow state where you're like doing something you love so much, you lose track of time, you're not worried about the goal. You're not worried about winning the game. You're not worried about lifting the weight. You're just so deeply in it that it's just the process of whatever you're doing engages you. Like, I want your whole life to be that. Like, I don't want today or tomorrow or 1 minute, or I don't want you to hit flow state once a year when you happen to create the right exact moment to be in it. Like, how do we start feeling that way on a regular basis? And I truly believe that's after by going after little p purpose.
Yeah, I love that. Do you have a question?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I it just has my brain going because I'm thinking through these things that and athletes come to mind, right? Like everybody, the stated goal, the expected goal, the anticipated goal is a championship. But I truly think, when you look at the greats, like you look at the Michael Jordans and you look at the Kobe's and you look at these different folks, um, a lot of times people note how hard they practice. And I think the how hard they practice is an indicator for their true love, that they love doing what they're doing. They're not just, and you don't win every year, right? And you may go on a run, you may win, but you don't win every year. And I think there's a joy in that. And it just makes me think, how do I practice life well? Right? Like, how do
Mhm.
I practice life well? And I think there's a place for goals, but it also, I think we get so wrapped up in, like, I want to be a great dad. Okay, well, what does that look like? Like, I'm not just going to wake up and be a great dad, and I may never be a great dad. But this morning, when I'm having conversation with my kids over the breakfast that I make them, and I can intentionally inject or choose my mood, then there's opportunities in all of that, just that little stuff to be a great dad, right? And it's just it's fascinating to me, and it really, it's challenging. And but what's also interesting to me is how much life slows down. It's almost like impact goes up and life slows down if we really think of it in the appropriate way.
I love this metaphor of being a good dad, or this example of being a good dad, because you know what? You didn't become a good dad when your kid graduated college, which is the big goal. You didn't become a good dad when your kid gets married or has their own kid. You became a good dad every day as you showed up and actually did the thing. Same as Michael Jordan didn't become a world championship basketball player the day he won the championship. He became a world championship basketball player every day he walked out at 4 or 5 in the morning when no one else was there and started doing his dribbling drills and shooting hoops. Like that's when you become is in the doing. The accolades, the achievements, the goals, they're almost beside the point. It's in that day to day, it's in that flow state, it's in the process, not necessarily the product, not necessarily the goal, when you become the thing you want to be. And so, what I love about this, what feels so abundant about this, is you realize the goal isn't even important. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you hit the goal because actually, what was important was that showing up every day to day and doing the thing. And we all can do the thing. We all can't be the perfect father. We all can't be an NBA champion. We all can't name whatever it is you think your most important goal is, but we all can be in the arena every day, fighting it out, getting bloodied, getting knocked down, and getting back up. And that's something you have innate control and agency over. And that's what really makes you feel good. Like what makes life feel good? It's that autonomy, it's that agency, it's that feeling like you have some control over things. And that's what I think we can do with purpose.
Why do we mess this up so much? Like why is it's almost like what you're saying is counter cultural or counter to what everybody says. Like why are we so backwards?
We've been sold a bag of false goods. I mean, look at social media, look at marketing. All these people are trying to sell you something. They're trying to sell you the six-pack abs. They're trying to sell you the life on vacation in Europe. They're trying to sell you being a boss in your job and being an eight-figure entrepreneur. And they're trying to sell you all sorts of things, but they're not trying to sell it for you. They're trying to sell it for them so that you will spend money, give them accolades, give them whatever they want. So they're trying to sell you on a version of purpose that isn't your purpose. It's their purpose. Same with our parents. For better or worse, parents in society often try to sell us on what they think we should be as opposed to what lights us up. Society says to be successful, you need to be a doctor or a lawyer, or a CPA. Like all that's wonderful, but obviously there are going to be a lot of people who aren't doctors, lawyers, or CPAs. So we have all these outside figures trying to push us to be things that don't innately fill us up. And so you can't co-opt someone else's version of purpose. You can't co-opt your parents' version of purpose. You can't co-opt an influencer's version of purpose because these are highly goal-oriented things. And often we don't actually have the agency. You might want six-pack abs, but you might be busy working and you can't work out 4 hours a day. And you might not have much money, so you can't afford the right supplements. And you might not have the genetics. I mean, your family might just have central obesity, and no matter how hard you try, you might not be able to thin out to be that level. If six-pack abs is your version of purpose, only a small number of people are going to get there and everyone else will fail. It's not something you have 100% agency over. And so I think we need to let go of a lot of these societal expectations and realize that in some ways we are being manipulated for other people's needs and start thinking about what we really want.
David, I know that one of your purposes is to have the six pack abs, but sorry to break it to you, buddy, but might not be in your line of work
Well,
there.
and I was actually going to say the same thing for you in biceps and like pecs and
Mm.
on all your teeth, actually.
Yeah, Jordan, I'm
Now you
losing a
can
tooth.
get dental work. Now, if you have enough money, you can get good dental work. But
That's
There you
right.
go.
My insurance doesn't cover that so much. Hey, Jordan, I'm curious if you get a lot of pushback and people equate purpose to a paycheck, purpose to money, finding a purpose that creates income. Do you hear that a lot?
so I think it's wonderful if your purpose creates income, But the problem with that is that money doesn't tend to buy happiness. And we can argue the studies. And a lot of people will point to a famous study by Kahneman and Deaton, right? And then after Kahneman and Deaton did a study that showed after $70,000, people aren't that much happy with making more. Now, of course, this was in early 2000s, so the numbers have adjusted. Then there's this guy named Killingsworth who said, well, no, not exactly. The studies I've done show that actually, for some people, making more money makes them more happy. I've looked at all those studies, and the truth of the matter is, like, the Kahneman data is all very retrospective, database oriented, and the Killingsworth data is like they sent out. If I always get this wrong, but I think they sent out either text or emails to people who had to answer them multiple times a day about how they were feeling at the moment, et cetera. And they did that for a certain number of weeks or months, and then they were done. I don't know if that really tells me that much about happiness and money. What I do know is that the Harvard Adult Health Study, which had went on for over 70 years, where they tracked individuals, interviewed them once every 2 years, interviewed their families, had them fill out all sorts of questionnaires, and prospectively managed and watched them, found that when it came to happiness, it was unrelated to money. It was unrelated to career. It was unrelated to achievements. You know what they found was most closely connected to happiness? Interpersonal connections. Interpersonal connections is what tended to make people most happy. And so all of you are listening to this and saying, wait, Jordan, your book is not called Interpersonal Connections, it's called The Purpose Code. Well, the reason is I believe little p purpose is the most forward, straightforward shot to interpersonal connections. Because I believe when you pursue little p purpose, it lights you up and you naturally affect the people around you. You form stronger relationships. And ultimately, I think it leads to happiness. So it's interpersonal connections. It actually isn't even purpose, but I believe little p purpose gets you there best.
Well, and that was, as I'm thinking through this, you're providing a framework and a path to get to, because I think a lot of people are uncomfortable, and Stu, I always brain fart on the whatever that book is called of the 70-year study, uh,
Oh,
whatever it's
I'll
called.
look it up while you're
Yeah,
talking.
I don't recall, but the study is something that Stu and I have looked at quite a bit because we, especially within the Kinetic Man, this is something that we emphasize is this relationship aspect, and I think so many people, even with relationship, um, it's almost the idea of more is better. Same with money, right? The lie, like I have to have more friends. Well, no, it's not more. And maybe it is more. Maybe it is more friends. Like for someone like me, I love the groups and I love to dive in and I love that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it is for Stu. Stu doesn't have any friends. But if you have that one that one person, I'm just kidding.
I have
Stu
Stu,
got
one.
friends.
Stu,
I have
Stu,
one.
I'm your friend, Stu.
Thanks,
That's
buddy.
that's beautiful. Thank you, Jordan, for if you want, we'll talk after and I'll turn over the binder to being Stu's friend and you can take over that responsibility. But but in
You have a
all
how-to binder?
seriousness, the purpose aspect of it, I feel is a path to get to these things which they ultimately and very strongly define, hey, it's relationships. But I think even that is overwhelming for people because they're like, oh, what now? I got to go make friends. Like now I got to put myself in a situation where I got to, it just, I think these things and the overwhelm is real. You highlight in your book, people get angry about this stuff
Oh yeah.
because it's so much pressure and it doesn't have to be, right? It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about going out and trying to make friends. If you pursue little p purpose, other people be drawn to you. You'll end up collaborating with them. You'll end up doing things. Here, I'm a perfect example. Look, I had a million doctor friends, and I could tell you my deeper relationships was with one or two, and the rest of them were totally superficial. And you want to know why? It's because I wasn't deeply connected to that purpose and identity being a doctor. I believed I was supposed to become that thing, and I did, and I realized it didn't fill me up. And so I didn't have that deeper connections. But you know what happened? When I discovered personal finance and writing and podcasting and public speaking, I went to these conferences and I met people, and I'd have these deep, profound conversations with them. And in 5 minutes, within 5 minutes, I would become more connected to those people than people I'd known for years through the hospital that I just never connected with. The problem wasn't how many friends I had. The problem was we weren't into the same things. We didn't attract each other for the reasons that were deep down and important. When all of a sudden I went to these conferences and people saw me passionately speaking about things that I held as deep, important and purposeful, all of a sudden they wanted to talk to me and they wanted to be on my podcast and they wanted me to be on their podcast and they wanted to work on this thing together. And then all of a sudden we were forming these collaborations. And so stop stressing about making friends or even stop stressing about interpersonal connections. Find things that you have an inkling might light you up, build a life of purpose around them, and people will be drawn to you because they're going to see you as your best self, most lit up and doing things that are most exciting and interesting to you. And most likely, that will form a community around you if you do it authentically.
Hey, David, that book that we always forget is called The Good Life by
Hmm?
Robert Waldinger and Mark Schultz. Um, Fantastic book. Um, Jordan, one of the anchors, one of the ways that say to find an anchor that kind of struck a chord with me is looking back at your childhood and thinking about like what passions you had as a kid, and often we walk away from those. And I'm curious, why do why do we walk away from those? Why is it that we have all this joy and happiness and fulfillment in our life as a kid, and then as we get older, we lose all that?
Because the adults around us change as well as the expectations. So, look, when I was 2 or 3, I had a dream about building a pool in my backyard. And so my mom took me out back and we played for hours clearing the grass, having fun. It was the best day. I can still remember it today. If I had gone back to my mom at the age of 12 and I said, "Hey, I want to build a pool in the backyard," she would give me every reason it was impossible or it couldn't be done. Here's the thing. We allow kids to be imaginative and free and wide and open, and we give them all that freedom. But as you get older, we start teaching you things like, well, you're not going to make money that way, and that's not a career. And again, we start trying to co-opt other people's version of purpose and give it to our children or put it on them or what society tells us. That doesn't mean that I should take my young kid and say, "Oh, you're going to build pools for a living," although that might be what they want to do. But it just means we're a lot less open to it. And so we tend to drop these things that are deeply important to us because we get busy becoming adults and building a career and building a life. The problem is a lot of us forget to come back to them. So, there are countless people. I give an example in my book of a lady who loved horses when she was a kid, and everyone knew it. You would have gone to her room when she was a little kid, and there were pictures of horses, and there were medals from her horse shows, and all sorts of stuff. She goes to college, she starts her professional life, she gets a job, and as most parents do, they didn't touch her room. All this time, sitting in her room was one of those big purpose anchors, and she found herself feeling lost as an adult. And one of the things I kind of pointed out is, well, what did you love as a kid? He's like, well, I asked my mom, and my mom said, I know exactly what you love. We have all that junk still from your room about horses. And so the point being is, we love and connect with things as kids because we feel free and no one's telling us we can't or we shouldn't or it doesn't fit into society. And so those joys of childhood often are of deep interest to us, even as adults. And so it's a wonderful thing to be able to go back and say, oh, I really loved doing these things as a kid. Could this be an anchor? Could I start building purpose around this again? And here's the wonderful thing about Little P Purpose. You go out and you try it. And if you're happy and excited and you want to do more, you do more. And if you're not, you move on to the next anchor.
So, Stu, I'm going to take this opportunity to let you know I'll continue to do the podcast with you, but I am going to be fly fishing every single day
Oh
from here
yeah.
on out, and really finding how I can also monetize that
Yeah.
and make it at least just support my habit. Um, it's interesting. I'll tell you, Jordan, being more intentional with these books and reading, specifically on things that you highlighted in taking stock. I was talking to my brother about taking stock, on the way in this morning and just talking about you and your message. It really changes the way. So the way that, as a student growing up and I was in honor classes and all that kind of stuff, and I was at the higher end of what the offerings were in school, right? Super smart. I'm trying to say that really humbly. I'm super smart. That's
Of
all joking
course, of
aside.
course.
But I was very much into academics and I did well in the traditional schooling system. And that benefited me to the things I want to do. Well, I have one of my kids is very much the same way, but my middle guy, he thinks different, but he's very creative. He does like he took a cardboard box and just cut it up and built he built a gun
Hmm.
out of it, and it has a clip that comes out and goes in, and like stuff I could never conceive. Like that's not me. And he takes these Legos and he's like, Dad, I'm gonna build an aircraft carrier, just loose Legos, and he sees it and he builds it, and it's fascinating to me. But what's interesting is your the messaging that, specifically recently in reading your book, I'm like, man, I have an obligation here. If I truly desire an anchor of mine is to be a great dad, then I have an obligation to know my kids intimately and to help them foster theirs and encourage their little P. And go ahead. You're gonna say
I was
something. I
going to
don't
say,
want.
but it's really important. The best way for you to help them foster their little P is to have anchors outside of being a dad that you model what that behavior looks like. Because if you anchor being a dad as your purpose, which is a wonderful purpose, but you don't want that to be their sole purpose either. You want them to go out as adults. Maybe they don't become parents. Like you want to also model for them these independent things that they love doing, that they do just to do.
Yeah.
And so if you really are worried about anchoring, if you're really worried about showing them what little p purpose is, you need to do that in your life outside of relationships. They need to see you in that activity, that hobby, that thing that lights you up,
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And
and
you
they need
kind
to
of
see you
started.
doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of started answering my question. Because with in knowing him and encouraging him to establish his anchors, like asking questions, right? Well, why'd you build that? What do you enjoy? He's gonna go into robotics class in middle school, and I'm really interested to see how that manifests, because he's like, the traditional subjects are not things that he's super interested or excels in, but these other areas that are different than mine
Hmm.
it's really interesting to observe him excel in those areas, right? But my question to, and you started answering it, is how do we take all this information and actually be people who make a difference? Not just in there's a lot of power in understanding our own purpose, a ton, and there's a lot of anxiety around not finding it. But how do we encourage and how do we foster and become people that drive this message outside of ourselves?
I think the easiest way is to pursue little p purpose in your own life, and you will naturally touch the people around you. So, the example I give in the book, in the first introduction of the book, I talk about Roman, a guy who owned an antique store in my neighborhood. And one day he happened upon a bunch of baseball cards, didn't know what to do with them, and sold them to a neighborhood kid for 10 bucks. The neighborhood kid turned around and said, "Ha, look at this. This is $100 worth of cards." Roman was enthralled so much that he decided he wanted to incorporate baseball cards into his antique shop. And within a year, he had hired this teenager. He had then done the work of creating purpose. He had researched it and bought a bunch of cards and marketed it to the local kids. He pursued his little p purpose, not because he wanted to change the world, not because he even wanted to help these kids. He was just enthralled by this idea. But what happened is this antique store became a hub for kids in the neighborhood, especially geeks, nerds, those that didn't have a community but loved baseball cards. And I know because I was one of them. My father died when I was 7 years old. I had a learning disability. I had almost no friends. But this antique store became a place where I found community. Roman wasn't trying to build community for me, he was simply doing what he loved. But what's amazing is the confidence I gained in that store by knowing that I was worthwhile, that I was lovable, that I could have friends. The confidence that all those kids got changed the world. Those kids left and became doctors and lawyers and CPAs, and some probably became store owners. And they went out into the world with a renewed sense of confidence and probably changed it all because this guy named Roman, not even trying to, just pursuing his own sense of purpose, did it and did it intentionally. And like a moth to the flame, we all came and he changed all of us. Roman died 30 years ago, yet his impact on my life is still profound. You want to impact other people, pursue purpose intentionally, and welcome in the community you form. And you will become teacher and student, you will become mentor and mentee, you will profoundly touch other people. And like a pebble dropped into the ocean, you will form a wave that will dissipate at times and then join other waves and grow at others. But before you know it, the impact of those waves will be seen miles and miles away, years and years later. We all know this. We all know this because all of us have family stories that have profoundly impacted our lives, even from family members that we never knew. A lot of times we call this generational trauma, right? Where a family member had something bad. Let's say they lived through the depression or something bad happened. They developed these behaviors. They passed them on to their children, who passed them on to us. And we're like, the reason why I am this way, this bad thing, is because of generational trauma. There's also generational growth, meaning that people from previous generations pursue purpose in a wonderfully intentional way, and it changes the world. The example I give in my book is my mom's father, my maternal grandfather, someone who I never even met. He died before I was born, loved math. And because he loved math, he was a CPA. When my mom was little, she used to sit on his lap, and this is back in the 1950s and 60s. He used to do his spreadsheets, and she would sit on his lap and watch him do his spreadsheets, and he'd explain what everything was. So my mom, like any kid, tried on this behavior of her father, this thing he loved, this purpose in his life, this little p purpose, and she decided she liked that identity. So she decided that she also loved math. She eventually became a CPA. She had me. My mom modeled all this wonderful math behavior. I had a learning disability and couldn't read, but you know what I was good at? I was good at math because it was part of my identity. I had tried on my mom's identity of loving math and decided I loved it too. That saved me. Like if I hadn't been good at math, I would have just thought I was stupid. But I knew because I was good at math that I'd get over my reading learning disability. I became a doctor, a highly mathematical field. And one day when I was rounding in the hospital, I was seeing a patient, kept on getting him into the hospital close to death. And I looked at two of his lab numbers and I recognized a mathematical connection. And we diagnosed him with a rare disease that had a real simple treatment. We gave him that simple treatment. He stopped coming back to the hospital. He lived a fruitful life. And guess what? He was a pastor at a local church, and that pastor took in homeless children and fed them and helped them. So think about that. We can trace my maternal grandfather, a guy I never met, his love of math, his little p purpose. And 50, 60 years later, somewhere in a Chicago suburb, hundreds and hundreds of miles away from where he lived, some homeless child is getting shelter and food because of him, because he pursued what he loved. That's purpose. That's little p purpose. That's the way we change the world. You go out and do what you love, do it intentionally, and I promise you, you will affect the people around you. You will help create in them purpose. And that's what legacy looks like. It doesn't look like being president. It doesn't look like traveling to the moon. All of those things are wonderful. But this is the kind of legacy I think all of us can have.
And that fires me up.
Doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
Oh,
And something else that I was just, thinking through, and I don't know if we have time to talk through it all, but you had mentioned wanting to build the pool in the backyard, and at a 12-year-old, the parent says, "No, we the soil's not right. We don't have too much, we don't have enough money." Like I've been that dad, right? I've been the dad that says like,
yeah, totally.
"Nah, like my son loves tractors and he loves construction, and we'll drive through a construction site and be like, Dad, I'm gonna be a construction guy." I'm like, nah, no, no, they don't make that much money. Why don't you be like the owner of the company that does that, right? And like I've like poo-pooed on his ideas because I equate something to money. And so I'm like thinking through this as a trying to be a more intentional dad and like allowing that to happen, like going along with it, right? Encouraging it. I don't know how else to put it, but it gets me thinking of like how to show it better as a dad.
Yeah, show up
David.
better as a person, as a spouse, as a friend. It's like, yeah, like your kid will figure it out. Strangely enough, kids are smart. Like he might say, I want to start building a tractor, and he'll either do it and love it, or he'll be like, dude, I thought I wanted to be a tractor operator, and I've kind of checked it out, and I don't want to do that, but I love the way these things are made. Maybe I want to be an engineer.
Mm.
But you got to almost let them self-determine, because You want them to have that joy. You really do. You want them to begin with the joy. They'll always eventually get towards goals, whatever those goals are. But goals are flighty and transitory. We really want them to enjoy the path they take, and we want them to enjoy what they're doing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not Pollyanna. I'm not like you need to do something you love all the time. It is fine to take a job that makes you money, that
Right.
isn't your perfect joy or purpose. But you got to be intentional about then using that money as a tool to allow you to have some free time to pursue purpose in other ways. Like it's not perfect, and we don't all have to quit our jobs and only do things purposeful, but we certainly need to be intentional about how we're spending our time and what's worth it. Like, is it worth me giving my time to something I don't like doing, but that then allows me to do things I do like doing? And if that the answer is yes, it's worth it, then do that job you don't love, but make sure it's in service to developing a sense of little p purpose, because I think that's where the happiness and the legacy and the rest of it come in.
Mm, so good. Jordan,
Yeah.
this conversation did not disappoint. I can't wait for people to read the book. Tell us more about where we get it and when it comes out.
Purpose Code comes out January 7th, 2025. You can go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. It will also be available wherever books are sold, bookstores, as well as online on Amazon, Target, Walmart, you name it, it'll be there. Barnes and Noble. So check it out.
Jordan, I love it. I'm so appreciative of your time and more so just your gift to the world, right? Your gift to me personally. I know there's a lot of folks out there that could say the same thing that just reading the words, you living in your small p, you living in your gifting, enables us to think very differently, right? And it has an impact. You literally have an impact within my home. You literally have an impact with as I consider the things that I want to do with my life, and that's a powerful thing, dude. It's a powerful thing.
This is me practicing my little p purpose. So when you say you have an impact, you change things, that's because I'm just doing what lights me up. I love you guys, but that's not really my goal. My goal is I'm doing this because it feels important and fulfilling to me, but as a wonderful side effect, hopefully some of these things I say, whether it be in my book or in our podcast or what have you, will reach you and help you at a point where you need them. And that's little p purpose.
I love it.
So good.
Living legacy, my man. Living legacy. It's
Guys and
amazing.
gals,
Thank you.
we'll put everything in the show notes. If you haven't read his first book, Taking Stock, go read that and then get his book, Purpose Code, when it comes out on January 7th. Jordan, thanks again.
Thank you so much. Wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. See ya.